welcome to Victoria Rumble Room, one of life's little pleasures, where we cover the big issues from Vancouver Island, BC, Canada, and the great beyond. And speaking of the great beyond, off in the wilds of Saanich, in his lair is Jilton, John Juricic, the Croatian sensation. How are you, John?
Geez, Robin, I'm fantastic. I just came off of a Saanich landmark, Elk Lake. I was training in there for the great Masters water polo tournament, as you know, to be held who knows where, and feeling fantastic, and very much looking forward to our show today.
I'm sure a lot of people were impressed to see you down there at Elk Lake in your Speedo. I wished I could have been there, John.
Yeah, well, it's a very private area that we train in. I'll never tell you.
So I'm glad you're saving all of us that. Off the top, a big move announced by Justin Trudeau, our Prime Minister, as we now have a new Governor General of Canada. And thank God Julie Payette's gone. I could go down that trail. Let's not even talk about that. Our new Governor General, however, is Indigenous. She is Indigenous. She speaks English. She speaks Inuktitut, but not French. Mary Simon. Very exciting news. And she promises to improve her French, but who can argue, John, with having the introduction during this time of reconciliation of an Indigenous Governor General?
Brilliant move. Obviously, extremely well-qualified person, especially after the unfortunate incident with our last Governor General, Julie Payette. Whether this will be portrayed as a purely political move remains to be seen. But if we weren't in an imminent election call, I would say this is definitely a move towards exhibiting reconciliation in our country. A whole bunch of other things have to happen, however. A lot's being discussed, a lot's being discovered. And there's a lot more policy that has to be told, but great first step.
Absolutely. We're all pleased about that. And John, speaking of political, the rumblings beginning. We're going to have an election soon, a federal election. And this Indigenous Governor General is just one of many signs. I think that this is just around the corner. And still concerning reconciliation, something that we've seen just locally in the last week or so. 9 chiefs of the South Island bands gathering together with various mayors, civic politicians, also members of the provincial government, saying no more to the violence, no more to the damage to our churches, no more damage to the statues that are in our city, and certainly no more burning of totem poles. And, you know, this woke culture, John, I feel it's gone too far.
Robin, it may or may not, but these folks that are burning down churches and taking down statues, these are professional anarchists, believe me. One could argue, how the hell do you know, John Juricic, who these people are? It's obvious. There's a class, a group of folks who are interested in chaos, who are interested in destabilizing. And research has shown that they travel amongst the different
protests, the groups, whatever's topical. They were up there protesting when we had the oil pipeline dispute and the gas pipeline dispute. And I've seen some of the features. It's the same people that have drifted down now to Ferry Creek. Yeah. They're almost an arrest me crowd.
Oh, it's a business. It's an industry. Will they care? No, they want more. So it's very positive that the folks that are being accused of initiating this violence are in fact saying, no more. That's not us, and that's not the way to effective reconciliation and cultural assimilation.
Right on, John. That's really well put. And, you know, we have some other good news that's happening. There will be no more briefings. The regular briefings we've been getting from Dr. Bonnie Henry and Adrian Dix, the Minister of Health, about COVID-19. That's a super sign that we're finally getting top of this pandemic. So many people are getting their second vaccinations. I think that we're moving in the right direction, and I'm quite relieved about it.
If this pandemic were to be analogized to, let's say, a ladder, we're climbing onto and off the ladder. I think we are at nearly the top or the final rung, but we're not over this. I've got double vaccinations. I think you do. Most folks that I know my age have. Nonetheless, and the numbers are coming off dramatically in this province, right across Canada, but do not let your guard down. Please, to our, how many listeners? I think you double checked this morning, several million. I don't know how we're doing it, Robin.
Several million potential listeners. They're out there somewhere, John.
But not a time to take our guard down. I see festivals are opening, we're meeting, there's all kinds of things. Let's continue to be cautious until we know for sure that we've reached a community immunity, so to speak.
That's really well said. And I want to add to that, John. As you say, it sure is liberating to get that second vaccine shot. You feel this huge relief. You feel, my goodness, I finally have got past this terrible crisis. But you can never put the cart before the horse. The pandemic is not over, not even in Canada. There's still a lot of work ahead. Sure, we have a high rate of first vaccinations across the country. People are really excited about it. A lot of people are getting their second dose. But because things are starting to ease up in BC and in other parts of Canada, some people are saying, great, the restaurants are open, the theater's open. I don't have to go through this anymore. I can take my foot off the gas. And that is a mistake. As soon as people do that, we are in trouble again. The new variants are spreading in North America. In a place like Los Angeles, apparently a huge number of new cases are people who even have had a single shot of vaccine and are getting the new variant. And certainly people who haven't had any vaccine are definitely getting sick. And worldwide, there are millions of people who have still not had vaccinations because it's simply not available. This is a world pandemic. Just because we're feeling safer in Canada doesn't mean we're still not vulnerable. We're vulnerable. We're vulnerable to what happens in the rest of the world. And we need to do something about that. And south of the line, half of our friends in the United States are double vaccinated. And that's great. Congratulations. Half of them aren't, John. Half the folks in the States are refusing to get vaccinated because they say it's some sort of a government plot, or they say that the science is off and they don't believe the science, or they believe that this is actually an act of God and it's up to God to decide whether you're going to get sick or not. And none of that serves. We have to be on guard at our border. Canadians cannot live in a bubble, but we have to be realistic. We've got to crush this COVID pandemic together. Let's not invite another wave so that we can move forward as a people and a planet.
Brilliant. As always. I totally agree with you, Robin. Hope all of our folks who are listening take heed. We need to end this pandemic. We need to end it now, but it's going to be gradual, and some rules. We can't just go from black to white. We can't just go closed, open. There has to be a transition. Americans, frankly, most folks coming to Canada should be double vaccinated.
Everybody.
I see in Quebec, they're making COVID cards mandatory. What is wrong with that not being right across Canada?
It should be everywhere.
It should be everywhere. What? Okay, anyway, I'm arguing with somebody out there who doesn't agree with this. I think BC needs to consider doing this. Gosh, come on, John Horgan. You have the freedom in our country not to get vaccinated, but you don't have the freedom to make you and I sick along the way.
It's exactly how I feel about it, John. And I think we need unanimity around the world that standards need to be met, and we got to help people across the world get those vaccinations and get in the safe zone. And that includes our friends in Japan, in Tokyo. And, in Tokyo and in Japan last summer, 2020, they were supposed to have their Summer Olympic Games. And then COVID hit and they had to back off. And the reason they had to back off was because they had some COVID-19 in Japan, but it wasn't a lot. So they said, well, we wear masks anyway. We bow, we don't shake hands. And so people in Japan did not rush to go get their COVID vaccine.
Right.
So now we're a year later, and we have now the 2020 Olympic Games taking place in 2021.
Yep.
And we're still in the same boat in a way. And there's been so much money spent on these games. And to talk more about the Olympic Games coming up in Japan is Cleve Dheensaw from the Times Colonist. He's been writing there for, 40 years, and a fantastic guy, written books, written articles. He's been introduced and inducted into the BC Sports Hall of Fame. And Cleve's going to talk about the island athletes to watch for and what to get excited about upcoming with the Olympic Games. But first of all, John, something that's near and dear to your heart, development.
Yeah, development, affordable workforce housing. It's something I've been involved with and on the advocacy side for about a decade now. I'm quite familiar and very lucky that we have a local expert, a local pundit, that being the CEO of Citified Victoria, Mike Kozakowski. Certainly knows more than a thing or two about development and the direction that Victoria, Greater Victoria, and the West Shore is taking in terms of its growth. Will home prices continue to rise? Will density and height become the norm in the city center? All big issues that have shown up locally in the media and amongst our guests. Let's dial Mike in from his comfortable lair, backyard office. Mike, welcome to the Victoria Rumble Room. Man, it's so exciting to get you on the show to talk about development. You talk about development on another show, another radio show in the city. I love listening to you every Friday. And, so many of the issues you and I have chatted about on other podcasts and other instances has been about the rapid growth and too much density. And there are folks who are now starting to resist this. Too much. And it's like, what's going on? What's really happening locally? What, from your perspective, Mike?
Mm-hmm. If we look at the projections for growth that stem back to the early 2000s, we had a 1% annual growth rate projection courtesy of the CRD. We've surpassed that by nearly 50% compared to where we thought we would be. And that means that for every home we had targeted to build, we should have really been building 1.5. And we're in a situation now where we're playing catch up and recognizing that the influx of people who want to live on Southern Vancouver Island is such that we are faced with political challenges, we're faced with social challenges, transportation, infrastructure challenges, and of course the biggest one of them all is housing challenges. How do we catch up to where we should have been, and how do we do it in a way that is still affordable? I mean, look at it this way. We can build 1 million houses next year if we want to. All we got to do is throw a bunch of money at it, get a bunch of people out here working, but that's not possible. So working within the realms of what is possible is the challenge, but we're certainly much further behind than we thought we would be at this juncture.
We had a chat with Professor Ted Relfs, who's a retired professor from the University of Toronto, and he has written books on planning and urban planning, and he's very concerned about what's going on in Greater Victoria. He says everywhere between Sydney and Souk, there are indications of a looming problem in urban planning. And he points very clearly at Harris Green development, which is going to be a massive project in Victoria if it's completed. As an example of that, is he right? Are we on the edge of some major changes that we're not really ready for?
Mm-hmm. Historically, the politicians of Victoria and the way that our planning regime has operated, was to focus the density in the downtown core. So for generations, we told people, look, we need to build more housing. That's clear, but we're going to focus it in the downtown core, and we're going to treat that as our high density node. Well, that's changed now. Density is knocking on every neighborhood's door. Density is being focused on just about every square inch of the city of Victoria, and the downtown core is no longer the only game in town in terms of density. So we're starting to see it a lot more. It's much more front and center in people's lives. They are now starting to recognize that single family dwelling neighborhoods are no longer necessarily protected as such, that if a developer has the opportunity to buy up several homes and turn that land into high density housing, they will pursue that. The city of Victoria is in essentially is 7,000 units behind where it should be. And Mayor of Victoria issued a blog post yesterday saying that until that 7,000 units is built for the existing population of the city of Victoria, council should be absolved of making any decisions regarding proposals that meet the official community plan. Now that is fine on its own, but what the mayor also said is that the official community plan itself is 20-30% below where we need to be to hit those targets. Now, this goes back to the projections being 1% 15, 20 years ago in terms of our growth rate, and the realization 20 years later that we are so far behind that there's no easy fix. In fact, it's so challenging that we're debating removing decision-making opportunities for elected officials. That's
not to re-ask the same question, but what are your feelings about Harris Green? It just seems so immense. Huge towers. It's really going to be totally different for the landscape of our city, isn't it?
You could have said that 10 years ago, but now we have a building that was completed at 25 stories. We have a building that is rising at 23 stories just down the road, kitty corner from Harris Green. 2 buildings just completed at 20 stories. 32 stories is certainly taller than anything we've seen in the city of Victoria, ever. In fact, there's nothing quite that tall on Vancouver Island anywhere. But it's the type of size that Kelowna is building. It's the type of size that other cities that are Victoria's size are building. And once they're built, once they're actually in there, and people start to recognize them as part of the built form, the awe factor tends to diminish. And 32 stories sounds like a lot on paper, but really compared to 25, we're sort of in that realm already.
So let's talk about the elephant in the room, besides me. So we talk about one municipality, there's 13 of them. And the pressures, are they being equally represented elsewhere? Okay, so the elephant being the largest municipality isn't Victoria, it's not Langford, it's Saanich. We've had Mayor Haynes on. What part of Saanich and are they absorbing some of this density and need? There's a new development near Beaver and Elk Lake, an 11-story complex being proposed or being built.
I think it's been approved, hasn't it?
Even approved. Your thoughts on Saanich's role in this region growing too fast?
Well, growth rate is not something that we can control easily politically, as we can the supply of a commodity or the supply, even water, to areas that don't have it. That's not something that we can, in this country, that we can say, listen, you just can't move here. It doesn't work that way. So Saanich is doing what all the other municipalities are doing. They are reacting to demand for housing. Saanich, being the biggest, is certainly not as well represented in terms of housing as it should be. It's certainly nowhere near the level of density that communities like Langford are supplying to keep us above water. We're not swimming very well, but at least we're not drowning. And that's largely thanks to communities like Langford that just said, look, we have a situation, we know the growth is going to occur. Let's just put up as much as we can. Can Saanich do more? Yes. Are they doing better than they were 5 years ago? Definitely.
So the thing I need to also ask you about is the rapid escalation in costs. And we have a very good friend. We're not going to name names today, but he's a good friend of ours who happens to sell real estate. And I have said to him on occasion, these prices are going through the ceiling. younger people, people that aren't high income earners are going to be shut out of owning a home in Greater Victoria. Even getting into a condo is going to be tough. I mean, shouldn't we do something to limit the amount of people that are coming in? And his argument is the supply. He says once we have the supply up, it's all going to even out. The only reason the prices are going up so rapidly is because we don't have enough housing on the market. Once we have that, it'll all even out. And I don't mean to say that he's wrong about that, but is that true? It seems like we're going to have a lot more supply. Isn't it also a situation where we need more supply and more low-cost housing attached?
The one part of the mayor's blog post that I neglected to mention, I was waiting to use it at just this juncture, was that when we do supply that 7,000 unit undersupply, it's believed it will already be too late by the time that we do it. And there is a physics equation here that we are up against. That is that there's a certain amount of manpower and capital that is required to solve these issues. We just don't have enough manpower to do it. And I don't know if there's enough capital to throw at it that is not absurd to even make a significant dent. Now, here's the thing. Macroeconomic issues can impact us overnight. We could be in a situation where the entire economy comes to a grinding halt and people dig into where they are and they're no longer looking to move. But here's what I look at in terms of where we can move, in terms of pricing. You look at Toronto, you look at Montreal, you look at some of the largest cities in the United States, and the value of single-family dwellings in those communities. They are selling for $3 to $5 million, average suburban homes. And that's the amount of room between our 1.2 average to 3 million. We still have that room to work with. That is what people are able to afford. Now, if they sell a $3 million home in Toronto and they buy one at the average price of 1.22 million in Victoria, they still have $1.8 million to put into the bank. That's what we're up against. Can we stop the flow of people? Well, there's an economic equation there that can certainly limit that, but we are recognizing that if you can't necessarily live here, that doesn't mean you shouldn't live here. I'm sorry, I should say if you can't necessarily afford to live here, that doesn't mean you shouldn't, because we still need the workers to supply the social services and the commercial services that the wealthiest of the wealthy still rely on a daily basis.
Yeah, I do. I know John's got another question, and I want to get to it. But I mean, in New York, they have rent control, and it makes sure that there's a lower rent for a certain percentage of the population because they need people to still work in services and tourism that aren't making big bucks. And if we get the prices up too high, people are going to have to live in Duncan or Nanaimo and commute to Victoria to afford to even be even close to living in a place and working in the city.
Yeah, well, we have the unenviable position of not only being a very expensive region in which to live and in which to run a business and to make a go of things financially, but we also have a very underdeveloped infrastructure network. In fact, I would say it's probably, if not the worst for a city our size, pretty darn close. We are a city of 350,000, 400,000 people that is gridlocked in many respects. We have still 20, 30 years after talking about rapid transit, not a single vehicle is rolling down our streets, that is considered rapid transit. And part of that is geographic. Part of that is also the problem of being 13 municipalities all trying to say the same issue.
Yeah, I was going to build upon this answer of yours. Let's kind of take our lens a little bit to the West Shore, an area of specialty for you, and we all realize how much expansion and explosion of activity, not just with housing, but with amenities, with everything, and just how that is impacting our region. But let's sort of a silo of that focus around transportation. You alluded to this. How the hell do we move around? Is the infrastructure going to be able to accommodate that? If it can't, as you sort of suggested, now what? Electric bikes? You want to bike from Souk to downtown Victoria? What are you hearing? What's your thinking about this?
Yeah, I'll tell you what we didn't plan for. We didn't plan for the electric vehicle revolution to happen as quickly as it did. There was a train of thought that assumed that the peak oil would hit in the early 2000s, not the late 90s, and the dependence of the personal vehicle would wane, and therefore rapid transit, public transit would play a much larger role. Walkable cities would play a much larger role. Well, here's the thing. We haven't hit peak oil. Oil is still dirt cheap compared to where it could be. It's certainly not creating an impediment. We now have electric vehicles showing up all over the place. And the theory that places like Triangle Mountain or Bear Mountain would become the future ghettos, so to speak, because nobody could afford to live there, that hasn't happened. And what we really need is more road infrastructure, obviously, that we've backed ourselves into a political corner where it's not politically expedient to build roads. And anytime you build a road, there are quite a considerable amount of forces that come out and say, hey, you should not be doing this. You're just encouraging more vehicles. You're encouraging more sprawl. Well, we're such a compact region as is, that is with such a small urban physical footprint that, for gosh sake, it's one or the other. Either we're all gridlocked together, or we start accepting that our urban containment boundary might need to push a little bit further out. Now, I'm not saying, before anybody in Saanich gets upset about the urban containment boundary there, that's a different animal altogether. I'm talking about north and west of Langford.
Well, I think we're reaching the end of this, and I don't know where to stop, because it just it goes on in so many different shades when you talk about development and where we're heading. I guess what I wouldn't mind, just as maybe a summation from you, Mike, is where do you see this city in 20 years? I mean, what's Victoria? What you said, now we're going to be used to seeing buildings that are 30 stories high. What's Victoria going to look like in 30 years time, or even 20 years time? And maybe, hopefully, John and I will still be here to see it.
Yeah, hopefully. Fingers crossed.
That's the pace we're going. I guarantee it. I will say this. Victoria is the Boston, Vancouver is the New York. So we are the Boston to New York City. And that's the future of a Victoria. The international money markets have woken up to the fact that very, very, very moneyed people want to live here, and they will not be stopped economically. They will continue to move here. So how do we accommodate that? And how do we accommodate the fact that a city has a natural growth rate, that it has many factors impacting population's growth? So I think what's going to happen is Victoria has long since been discovered. The big capital is here, $100 million deals, larger deals than that are happening with regularity. And it's just a sign of Victoria becoming that so-called Boston of the greater New York area. And that's the destiny, whether we like it or not. At least that's the path we're on.
Wow, loved hearing from Mike Kozakowski. What a breadth of knowledge. What a great overview of the development and housing affordability scene in Victoria.
Has a great way, John, of making complex issues seem more understandable. And I really value that when we're doing this type of an interview, because there's a lot of areas that we're probing around in, and it can get a little confusing. He made it very clear. And talking about difficult issues that are very difficult sometimes to get your head around. How about the Olympic Games in Tokyo, Japan? Well, we have another guy who can really pick it apart for us and really knows his stuff. Cleve Dheensaw from the Victoria Times Colonist, somebody that I had worked with when I was back at Czech TV back in the 80s and 90s. He's been there for over 40 years now. Cleve just really accomplished a lot of things in his time. He's written numerous articles. He's written books. Oh, yeah. He's a member of the Hall of Fame in British Columbia. Right. And we're so pleased to have him on the show. So let's zoom Cleve in.
Right. Well, welcome to the Victoria Rumble Room, Cleve. Very excited to meet you for the first time. Our paths have crossed numerous times through sport hosts, maybe some Victoria Sport Tourism Commission meetings, but you have been around the sport industry and the sport reporting environment for, dare I say, decades?
41 years? Is it 41 years?
It'll be 40 years in September.
We could do an entire show
with the Times Colonist, yeah.
With
Yeah,
the TC.
and all in the sports department. So
Oh gosh,
Yeah.
it's okay. It's an honor talking to you.
that's great.
But really, today we're here to talk about these darn Olympics getting underway in Tokyo, and just kind of what's going on over there. We have a lot of island athletes on Team Canada. We're very proud of that. How do you give us some sense of your reflections on what's going on, and lately this notion that there won't be any fans? What's that like, competing in front of empty seats?
It's not a notion. They've declared no fans will be in attendance. Which I find kind of strange, because as I watched Wimbledon and I watched the Euro soccer progress to pretty much full crowds as their tournaments went on this month.
Right.
And then we see the Tampa Bay Lightning celebrating a Stanley Cup championship in front of a full arena. So there seems to be no real equity or every country is different and every jurisdiction is different in how they handle this. And obviously in Canada, the Montreal Canadiens were only allowed 3,500 in the building, but outside, cheek by jowl, 50,000, standing right next to each other without masks, in little pens, and not widely spread out, watching on the big screen. So I really don't know where the health authorities are with this, around the world. But Japan, of course, has its own rules, and they've had a bit of, they've had a smaller amount of cases than most countries in the world, but their
Until
vaccination
now.
rate.
But now they're having problems.
Yeah, they're having problems, but relatively speaking, it's still not a lot compared to what other countries, especially in Europe, went through. So, but they're being on the safe side because they know they have to be, just for public relations, and so they've declared no fans. They earlier declared no foreign fans allowed. And last week they announced no even domestic fans, but there will be fans there in terms of sponsors and that kind of stuff. They don't call them fans, of course. They call them supporters or sponsors, and so they will be allowed in, but very few of them. And obviously when it first came out that no fans were going to be allowed in, a lot of island families were going to go over, because there'll be over 75 island athletes, or island-based athletes. They're all from here, but they've come to live here to train over the last quadrennial 4 years, 8 years for many of them. And obviously a lot of the families of the local island people were going to go over and watch their kids perform. It's a once in a lifetime thing, but 2 months ago that was nixed, and so they knew that wasn't going to be happening for them, and now they'll just watch them on TV. The biggest thing, Robin and John, is that I don't think the fans are that important. They have to get this on TV. That's the major thing about the Tokyo Olympics, is 73% of their revenue comes from TV for the International Olympic Committee, and 18% on top of that comes from sponsors who demand that their product be shown on that broadcast. So virtually the entire IOC revenue stream is based on television. So all they have to do is put on a made-for-TV event, and that's what they're going to do. So the venues will basically be studios, and the athletes will be there to perform, and they'll get it on TV, and they'll get their money, and everybody will be happy, I take it. So.
Everybody but the athletes, maybe.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about some of these island athletes you mentioned. And Cleve, I'd like to start at a sport that you and I actually covered a lot together through the years. Yeah. I arrived in 1980. You were in 81, I think. We worked together.
Well, I'm born and raised in Victoria, but I arrived at the Times Colonist.
Well, I'm thinking when we actually worked side by side. I was at Czech, you were at the Times Colonist, and both of us got lured in by Al Morrow to go out to Elk Lake.
Yeah,
get
love Al,
early.
because he was my first sort of major beat in many ways, right? That and Shamrocks lacrosse, Cougars hockey back in the days. But you and me just took a shine to what was going on at Elk Lake, and it first started at UVic, right? And when these guys were winning championships, and it was interesting. And then the coach, Al was a great guy, right? And very energetic. And I'll never forget what he told me. He goes, it's you don't have a lot of money in our sport, so I break it down from the nice to do's to the need to do's, and he focused on the need to do's. And all you needed was a boat, and he made sure the and the athletes, and you made sure you recruited those often from other sports, athletes who were cut. And as long as they were large limbed and able to pull, and you needed boats, so he made sure that the funding was there for that. He needed a lake, he had that here in town, which is great. And so, from a bare bones operation, there we were in '84, and all of a sudden we think they're pretty good at the national level, and then you look at three of Al's guys, on the gold medalist. Olympic gold medalist, men's 8, in 1984 in LA, right? And three of those guys we covered, at UVic, Dean Crawford, Grant Main, Kevin Neufeld. And right. All of a sudden it sort of hit me in '84, what an amazing town we lived in, right? And that was Al's group. And then the basketball guys we covered, Ken Shields, basketball players, right? There was Eli Pasquale, Gerald Kozakowski, Greg Wilcher, making the semifinals against Michael Jordan. At LA in '84, and then going to the bronze medal game and just losing by a heartbeat to Yugoslavia, and the amazing stories that came out of that, and all these guys we covered locally in our hometown, on their home beats, and they're right to the world level, right? And so both of us were going like, wow, what an amazing place we've landed in to cover sports.
But right? I think we also were aware with Al, because Al, unfortunately, I guess for people in Victoria, had to move on to really take his major reins in rowing, because he left UVic, went to London, Ontario, where he ran the women's national program.
That's right.
And they went on to huge success in what?
Oh, look at
Barcelona, Rio,
Barcelona
Beijing.
92. Between Barcelona 92 and Atlanta 96, probably the greatest sort of 4-year or 8-year, whatever you want to call it, span in Canadian rowing history, and Al was a big part of that. And then, of course, here, Mike Spracklin took over the men's program. And of course, we all know, the great things that happened out of Elk Lake on the men's side.
So how does our rowing team look for these Olympics? That's what we're leading to.
Well, it's interesting because it dipped to an all-time low, at least in the modern era, since 1980 at Rio, when only most sports would love to have only one silver medal in the sport at the Olympics, right? The two Victorian girls in the lightweight pairs, Obi and Juricic, and they were the only two medalists last time, which is really low by rowing Canada standards. So they've slowly rebuilt on Elk Lake and at Quamachin Lake and Duncan over the last 4 years, and they have the largest rowing team, 29 athletes, are now in training in Japan, and it looks to be, I think we're going to get more than one medal out of this. Could be 2, could be 3. There's a couple of really highly ranked crews. The women's 8, of course, has been silver medalists at the Worlds, since twice since 2018. So they're definitely a group to watch. Although they have an injury in there, it'll be interesting to see how that pans out for them. And our women's doubles is with Kaylee Filmer, who is a Victoria born and raised with Hilary Jansen. They look like they could. They've been world champions 2 years ago, so they look like they could reach the podium and maybe the top of the podium. And there's a few other crews in there as well that should be looking pretty good. And again, another thing the local community can be proud of. I mean, these are athletes who not all are from here, but they all come here for many years of their lives to train on Elk Lake and Quamachin Lake now in Duncan, where they will be going post Tokyo. But island athletes who, I think the community can be sort of proud of and watch it from Tokyo and go, they came here to this community to get to where they are on the world stage.
So Cleve, I'd like to build a little bit on the business side. Okay, so you alluded to the fact that almost all of the IOC revenue is coming from sponsorship and TV, but let's look at the viewership side. Do you sense that people are going to watch these Olympics with nobody in the stands? We just had the soccer championship delayed by a year. I think a lot of people watch that, but that might be a different animal. What do you think?
I just think this is so different and unique that it might just draw a viewership that is beyond what anybody is expecting. Because I think people are just going, "Wow, what's going to happen here?" I just think there's a built-in interest in this because there's just the year delay, and then and then just the press surrounding, are the Olympics even going to go on? Will they be canceled again? Will they be canceled outright and just go right to Paris 2024 without Tokyo? I just think people will be just interested to see how the Japanese pull this off. And I think the viewership, at least in the early days, will be high just out of pure interest alone. Aren't you interested in how this is going to turn out? So, yeah,
big time, yeah.
I think a lot of people just on who might not even be sports fans are just going to be interested in this as how are they going to possibly do this, right? And what's it going to look like with no fans? And although people now are used to over the last 16 months of watching events with no fans, right? I mean, we've all, anybody that's a fan of the 7 NHL teams has spent the last season watching their team play in front of no fans, right? In their rinks. Only was Montreal allowed in the later stages of the playoffs to allow just 3,500. So I think we're all used to that now. By now, it's nothing novel that we've all seen it, and so it won't be that much of a thing to watch people performing in front of no fans, because we've all seen it so often over the last 16 months.
Now, some sports, Cleve, really lend themselves to television. Basketball is one of them, and very sadly, our national team fell short in Victoria, and that was too bad. I think a lot of people here were pretty excited having so many NBA players on that national team. We thought maybe they could get to the Olympics and do something. So that's too bad. What other sports will you be intently watching, and which sports do you see people from Vancouver Island having success at?
Well, definitely well, first of all, get to the basketball. Yeah, that was, Robin, you can have 8 individual NBA players on the team, but when you meet a Czech team that has only got one NBA player, but has played together at the Worlds and in Olympic qualifying before as a group of 8 or 9 of them, a team will always beat a group of individuals. And nothing against Canada. They just had, this is the way it is. They have NBA players who got to throw them together in a very short time frame, no time to play. You just come in and you hope for the best. So the golden generation, I think we're still going to hear from them. I think, from Paris 2024 and LA 28, I think, this group will be heard from. Unfortunately, and it was set perfectly by Victoria, right? Because we all know the history of basketball here, from 1936, and the 3 Victorians who won silver medal. The only time Canada's won a medal in the Olympics, Chuck Chapman, Art Chapman, and Doug Peden, silver medalists on that Canadian team. And then, of course, the UVic years with Eli, Gerald, Wiltshire, and Kelly Dukeshire and those players and their run at the Olympic Games. That went on through LA 84 and Seoul 88, 2 top 6 finishes in the world. So that would have been a great connection. And then Steve Nash, right? 2000 Sydney, the last time Canada's gone. Steve Nash of Victoria goes on to lead them to a 5-2 record and only a quarterfinal loss to France. They denied them a medal that year. So it would have been a great connection to Victoria to see this group come through Victoria to go and finally break that drought from Nash to 2000 Sydney to 2021 Tokyo, but it didn't happen. But I think we'll hear from this group. To your question, Robin, I think that the team to watch for team sports now that the basketball guys won't be there will be the women's basketball team, which is number 4 or 5 in the world, the top 5, definitely medal threat. And for Vancouver Islanders, the team that is based here, the women's rugby sevens team. They're ranked 3rd in the world, and they won a bronze medal in Rio in 2016 when the sport made its debut at the Olympics. And I think they're on beam for a medal in Tokyo. They're a very veteran group that is stuck together another year now. In fact, a lot of them were, thinking of get on with their lives after Tokyo, and that was delayed a year. So they've had a bit of turmoil in Langford out there where they're based. You probably heard that John Tate was let go as coach, and on basically a revolt from the players for various reasons, and so they've had to regroup from that, and so we'll see how that affects them in Tokyo. That'll be very interesting how this group goes ahead with the new coach and with all the stuff that they've been through in terms of the internal sort of political stuff that group has gone through. So, but they have enough talent and they have enough veteran talent that I'm picking them to be on the podium. And they've lived. This group has lived here together in the Langford area for 8 years, and and I think they've lived together, they've eaten together, they've trained together, they've gone through turmoil together, they've won a medal together. In Rio, and I think there's enough experience there that they could land on. I think we'll land on the podium. So the men's and the Langford-based men's group is interesting too, in that obviously a little more depth of field on the men's side in the World Rugby, and so they're based out of Langford Langford too, and they qualified for the first time ever. They didn't qualify at Rio, and so they could spring a surprise. They've beaten a few top teams like Fiji, defending gold medalists in the past, and I think if you look at those guys, they could spring a surprise on the day.
Cleve, thank you for that, by the way. That's very interesting, especially on the Langford side. Years ago, I was a dev officer for Stu in Langford and helped bring the Rugby Canada to Langford. But let's personalize this a little bit. These games have now been delayed a year. Personally, my whole life is business, obviously family, etc. But business, I can't really be away from my business for a day or two. What's it like for these athletes? They're away from their primary goal, or at least it's been delayed for a year. What's that like? Tell us, have you heard some stories of potentially island athletes who have quit in the past year or gone on with their lives, etc.?
Not many that have quit because it was announced early that it'd be a year later, right? And so, I mean, you've put in that many years already that you're not going to, quit at that point. But
unless you're 32 or something like that.
Exactly. Yeah, there have been a few. There's been a few around the world who have just retired because another year was too much and they had to get on with their lives, right?
Yes.
I think the women's sevens rugby team is interesting. They had a lot of them had plans to buy homes, and getting on with their lives and get on with their civilian careers. And a lot of them had made plans, because I mean, you just don't jump into that. So those plans, so life plans were put on hold for a lot of them, and including the purchase of homes wherever, in their home provinces and the jobs they had lined up afterwards. Because a lot of them are older now. That core group of them, are in their late 20s, early 30s. So I know a few of those players who have had to put, a year later is a big deal to them, and especially John, as you mentioned, the older athletes, the early 30s athletes.
Yes,
that's a big, because you made plans and you got to hold off your other job and you've got to tell these people. But everybody knows the Olympics. I mean, it wasn't like nobody's heard that the Tokyo Olympics were not postponed, right? So
I had to delay my
triathlete like a major
career.
deal, right? And so I think most of their future employees would have heard that, that they're probably going to be delayed a year. So.
John had to delay his long-awaited re-entry into water polo.
Yes.
From a personal point of view, I mean, I'm accredited to go to Tokyo. I was going to go last year, and I was going to go this year, but I've decided not to go, just because it's just as easier to cover it from here. The way things are now with the how we're speaking now versus, I mean, I can virtually reach anybody I want to reach when I want to reach them.
Yeah.
Whether I'm sitting in my den in Victoria or whether I'm, in Tokyo. And it's just so restrictive there. I mean, you have to stay. I had to cancel my hotel early just because I couldn't stay there. You had to stay in their hotel, which which obviously is going to be bubbled. You can only go to the venue and back. And on the buses, which will be bubbled, and you can't use public transport. And you got to be tested every day for the first week, and then 3-day quarantine. And I thought, I mean, this is just such a hassle, right?
Oh yeah, you could go downtown and watch it from a computer.
Robin, as you know, when they decided they were going to shut the bars down at 6 p.m., I thought, that's it. I'm not. What's the point?
Fantastic.
And only 3 years to Paris 2024, not the normal 4, right? So
right on.
Going up to that long to wait.
Well, that means you can keep working till you work there 50 years at TC.
Exactly. Well, actually, I was gonna, I had looked, because Robin, back in the day, there's so many Olympians that train here. We sort of judge things by Olympiad, right? And that's the next 4 years. That's the next quad. I was going to retire after Tokyo, but this is such not a satisfying experience. The way this has turned out, that there's only 3 more years. So I think I've sort of Paris 2024 is now my sort of long-term goal to keep going until then.
They can have a nice send-off party for you at the home.
That's right.
Just great to have Cleve on this show, John. I'm just so happy when I'm able to catch up with an old compatriot and, of course, get a lot of great information on the Olympic Games. We'll certainly all be watching.
Well, so will I. And apparently that's it. It's just going to be us viewers on the TV, as Cleve brilliantly, wonderfully explained, especially the water polo. And I'm, of course, I'm an extra. So if I'm called, you might see me there. Yeah, not.
I guess your water polo would really improve if you learned to swim, John.
That would make a difference, wouldn't it?
probably help. Yeah. So, Johnny, the Victoria Rumble Room, you can tell by the giddiness in our voices that something is up.
Yeah,
And the something is up is that after almost 5 months on the air with this splendid show and millions of potential audience that we have yet to reach, we've decided that it's time to take a little short break, to take a holiday.
Yeah.
We're taking a vacation from the show, but it's not a complete vacation, John. We're still going to provide little rants, little thought pieces that we're going to have for the next couple of weeks, talking about some of the big issues ahead. And we're very excited about all of those. And we really encourage you to tune in for that. And while you're tuning in, there's ways that you can also like the show, follow the show, get on side with the show. And John, maybe give them more details on that.
Well, absolutely. And as you can see on the screen now, all of the sort of addresses for our YouTube site, our Facebook site, our Twitter site, and our website are listed. Please consider joining, sharing, listening, watching. But I'll just focus on one sort of every week, that being the Twitter page. You know, Twitter is not a huge area of sharing for us, but nonetheless, it is a social media platform that we are on at Victoria Rumble Room 1. It contains our logo, where we're rumbling together. So consider joining us. I'm examining Instagram Reels. I'm examining TikTok videos and broadcasting our message that way, telling stories, essentially using content marketing to spread what I think are now upwards of 20 shows and editorials we've done in the last 5 months. It's going to be good to have a little break, but I cannot wait to come back. And I'm going to come back and I'm going to continue, as always, to be John Juricic, Croatian sensation and man of the match.
And I'm Robin Adair, and rumble on.